So here we go. We have Charles Paxton here on the Strange Oddities Podcast. Charles, thank you so much for doing the interview here on the Strange Oddities Podcast. The world is familiar with one of the most famous cryptids that are out there, which is the Lochness Monster. Of course, Loch Ness being in Scotland. As you can see the image behind me, I thought it would be appropriate for this interview. I have the loch behind me. I'm not really there at the loch, but it's just a green screen kind of thing I have set up. But I thought it'd be great for this interview and make Charles feel a little more at home here during the interview. So, Charles, thanks for doing the interview. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks.
Yeah, great. No, I don't know if you can move your camera just down a little bit.
I've moved myself up a bit.
That works. That's better. Great. All right. So we're going to talk about cryptozoology a little bit. Charles is he's works with the University of St. Andrews School of Mathematics. He's kind of a ecologist. The study of ecology, more into statistical research, like you had mentioned. What else do you do with the university? Give us a little more background about yourself. How did you get started in this field of research?
Well, at the university, I also teach statistics. I also teach scientific and critical thinking, and partially out of that and partially out of a childhood interest in mysteries, and because of my interest in zoology, I've kind of taken an interest in cryptozoology as a kind of side interest, more really for academically for the last 25 odd years, and I've been publishing peer-reviewed cryptozoology in proper journals for the last 25 years, which I can safely say have been pretty much ignored by both the cryptozoological and skeptical communities, which I find kind of interesting. But I steadily churn out papers kind of questioning assumptions that both sides make, and just sort of saying, well, can you really say all the things that you're saying, either as a believer or not as a believer? I also delve into the history of cryptozoology and cryptozoological claims. I'm very interested with a bias towards aquatic things. That's kind of my interest. I can't really tell you very much about Bigfoot or anything like that, but my interest is in things like the Lochness Monster, sea serpents, the kraken, the actual zoological history of the giant squid, claims of giant octopuses, these sorts of questions.
Cool. Yeah, the giant squid, which is, they kind of, if I'm not mistaken, they believe to been extinct for some time, and then I think kind of resurfaced recently, right? They rediscovered. No.
This is a myth within the cryptozoological community about the history of the giant squid.
Right.
Perhaps promoted quite a lot by Bernard Hoovermans in his influential books, but the actual history of the giant squid is quite interesting. I mean, giant squid, we have recognized drawings of giant squid stranded individuals from the 16th century onwards. And scientists, or as you might call them, natural philosophers, were publishing papers on giant squid in the 18th century. It was being described in the Proceedings of the Royal Society, actually, which is one of the premier scientific journals in the world. And in the 18th century, when you wrote a paper to the Proceedings of the Royal Society, it had to be promoted by one of the members. And the member who promoted one particular paper that was written in the 18th century which talked about giant squid was actually Sir Joseph Banks, who was president of the Royal Society. So this idea that scientists only recently discovered and accepted the existence of the giant squid is utter nonsense, because Sir Joseph Banks, as president of the Royal Society, was the personification of the scientific establishment in the 18th century. So there is this common idea, that giant squid kind of were only reluctantly accepted by skeptical scientists in the tail end of the 19th century. And nothing could be further from the truth. Any well-informed naturalist of the 18th century, late 18th century, who subscribed to the Proceedings of the Royal Society would recognize that giant squid specimens have been found, and you could extract from, and remnants of them have been found in the guts of sperm whales, and all these questions. So again, that's an example of these strange stories that both skeptics and cryptozoologists believe, which actually are not based on any actual historical reality.
Oh, wow.
And there's lots of them.
Yeah.
So these perceptions can be quite wrong.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. So I just wanted this to kind of be a segue into the main topic of the interview, which is Lochness Monster, which is globally known all over the world. There's a lot of sightings of the Loch Ness on video, on photo. There's that famous black and white photo of, I believe, a woman took the photograph, and there's a lot of skeptics saying that, it could be a log floating in the water, could be misidentification of another animal or species that's in the loch. We've also spoken to a paleontologist, touched briefly on the show about some background of the loch, and saying that there's not enough food supply for such a large creature to be surviving in that kind of environment. What's your take on the Loch Ness Monster? What are some of your expertise and thoughts of your statistical research and what you've come across over the last few years?
So some things I can talk about, some things I can't talk about because they're under review, and as a good scientist, I don't like to talk about stuff which hasn't been gone through peer review.
Yeah, sure.
I'll talk in general, and I'll talk about some of the things that I have kind of published on.
Yeah.
So, firstly, I'd say that the Loch Ness Monster exists as a phenomena, as a reported phenomena. The Loch Ness Monster undoubtedly exists. So I've been collecting reports of the Loch Ness Monster, and the last time I counted, I think I had about 1,900 reports of the Loch Ness Monster. Now, those aren't independent encounters, because some of those reports come from multiple witnesses of the same event, or indeed come from the same witness just repeating their experience 10, 20 years later. And those accounts actually are really interesting because they tell us something about the way eyewitness testimony works. So the Loch Ness Monster exists as a reported phenomena, but that doesn't mean, of course, it exists as a biological reality. And of course, there have been lots of hypotheses of the Loch Ness Monster. And Adrian Shine and I wrote a paper, must have been about 8 years ago now, where, sorry, there's a fire alarm going on. Oh, it stopped. Sorry, there's a fire alarm.
That's okay.
I'm in the Loch Ness But, sorry, so I was talking about hypotheses of the Loch Ness Monster. So Adrian Shine and I wrote wrote a paper where we just enumerated all of the hypotheses of Loch Ness Monster which people have made, and in fact it's incredible. So at my last count, there were 101 hypotheses have been made for Loch Ness Monster, what the Loch Ness Monster could be, both prosaic, kind of, oh, it's like a lump of vegetation, or kind of exotic extinct animals, or ghosts, or all sorts of things. So we've got a reported phenomena, so we want to try and perhaps explain that phenomena. And of course, the big question that people are interested in is it an unknown animal or unknown animals? Because we might assume, knowing about biology, there would have to be a population of them in the loch. Now, what we know about the loch, because there's been quite a lot of biological studies of the loch, is it's what we call oligotrophic, which means it's low in nutrients, and relatively speaking. And we know quite a lot, because we've estimated it, the numbers of animals in the loch. And there are permanent resident fishes, char, eels, these sort of commonplace, fairly commonplace fishes in the British Isles. And then there's also migratory salmon that come through. So it does mean that the productivity, the food available to any large okay, no problem.
Yeah. Where were we?
Yeah, you asked a question about. I think you were still. Yeah, that was complete. So you asked a question about the biological basis for things in the loch.
Yeah.
So I'll start from there, and
okay. Cool.
Obviously, edit it and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So. So the question about the Loch Ness is. Well, what can we say for sure about the Loch Ness Monster? Well, we can say for sure about the Loch Ness Monster, it exists as a phenomena. It exists as a reported phenomena.
Yes.
And yeah, by my reckoning, there have been about 1,900 reports on the loch since the modern period began. Most of those reports represent individual events. Some of them represent multiple witnesses of the same event. So we know the Loch Ness Monster exists as a phenomena. So the question remains then, does it exist as a biological reality? And the answer to that question, I think, has got to be a reluctant no. And the reason I say that is that we know quite a lot about the biology of the loch.
Okay.
And the loch is what ecologists refer to as oligotrophic. It's low in nutrients. And so whilst it does have a population of fishes, there are fishes that tend to prefer living in a low nutrient environment. So for example, char are common in a loch, which is a salmonid fish which likes fresh waters but with low nutrients. And of course, we also get migratory salmon coming up several times a year, going through the loch.
Sure. Are there sturgeon there too, or?
Well, this is a hypothesis that Adrian Shine has.
Okay.
There could be migratory sturgeon, and it's a possibility. But as far as I'm aware, no one's ever shown the presence of sturgeon in the loch.
Okay.
I mean, they're kind of benthic fishes. They're quite cryptic, so it'd be quite difficult to show that. I would suggest, though, that they're not breeding in the loch. They're not breeding in that watershed. They're a kind of occasional visitors. So I would be doubtful whether. Well, I don't think any single explanation explains all of the Loch Ness Monster.
Okay.
As reports, I think you've got to think of it as a something that has multiple origins.
Sure.
So I also back of the envelope calculation of the biomass of prey.
Okay.
There are simple kind of ratios. Typically, we think of like 10 to 1 if you have a warm-blooded predator, given the total mass of fish within the loch.
Yeah.
And I thought that it'd be unlikely that the loch could support more than 1 or 2 large kind of monster-sized predators.
Yeah.
And partially that's supported by the fact that we do actually know about some fairly large predators that do come into the loch, which are seals. Now, they are reported quite regularly in the loch and have been at least since the 18th century. So we know that seals come into the loch. And of course, seals themselves can be mistaken for Loch Ness monsters. If you weren't expecting to see seals and you saw them playing in the water, then you might think that they could be Loch Ness monsters. So Biologically, it'd be really unlikely there's a population of unknown animals there, but it could support occasional visiting largish animals like seals,
Right.
things like that.
Sure. One of my questions on my list is I am aware that there's that could be a open channel that goes to the actual ocean from the loch. Is there any evidence that supports that is possibility of different species that could be swimming or using that open channel that goes out to the ocean and visiting the loch?
Well, there's two channels, in fact.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So there's the River Ness, which goes from the loch to the sea.
Okay.
That's quite shallow, and in fact, it was so shallow that they actually built a canal parallel to it.
Oh, wow.
To allow boats to go. So you could say that historically, that it'd be unlikely for any large animal to move into the loch, because it's actually in parts that river, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I've never actually double check this, but I'm pretty sure it's fordable in places. It's really quite shallow.
Yeah.
So it'd be unlikely that like a whale could get into the loch.
Yeah.
Although it was a 19th century claim, I think, that a whale did get into the loch, but I'm kind of sceptical about that. The Caledonian Canal, which was dug obviously so there could be boat access, is deeper. So once that was built, then that could that could allow something to accidentally go in the loch. And of course, that does happen. It happens worldwide, where you get occasional oceanic visitors going up into the loch. And in fact, if you look at the original newspapers from 1933, when the whole business started, then that was the most common kind of suggestion, that there was some sort of unknown large marine animal that made its way into the loch and was kind of disporting itself. It wasn't that there was this kind of historical presence of a monster in the loch. Well, I say that, there were some people who did claim that there was a kind of historical basis for that, but most people just were working on the assumption this was some sort of strange visitor that had come in from the sea.
Right. Yeah, and then there's the other theory of that, maybe because there are so many sightings over the years, that they were hibernating somehow and then coming back after hibernating wherever they hibernate, or that they were offspring, or, they're having I guess babies, and they grow up later in the years, and maybe that's why they're being called surviving all these years, if there was any kind of survival. But again, that's just another debatable theory. But like you said, because of the loch and all the food that's available for these type of large creatures, would be really hard for them to survive, right?
Yeah, I mean, ecologists typically have a kind of belief in that we think that you really need a minimal viable population.
Yeah.
You need just because of ups and downs of the population, and just making sure you've always got males and females available and things like that. And so typically they think about numbers like 30 or something like that. So we're talking about, if it was just the same population, there'd be 30 really big, predatorial, presumably, things wandering around the loch. And I think if that were the case, we'd be seeing the Loch Ness Monster rather more than we actually do.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that's unlikely. Of course, all my maths goes out the window if we're talking about something that isn't a predator. But then it's difficult to understand zoologically what sort of animal that could be, and why we need to reach large size.
Right.
And what would it be eating, because then it would be presumably herbivorous, eating plants either in the water or outside of the water. Now, admittedly, people have said there have been claims of a land Loch Ness Monster, but again, if there was something coming out to land, or something that was in the water and sort of nibbled on the vegetation on the outside, like manatees, for example, people see manatees, so they'd see that equivalent in the loch, right?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. There'd be some kind of evidence. And then I agree with you 100% about that you would have more sightings. Like, people would actually see it a lot more, if that was the case also. Because you do have people that live, on the loch. There are many residents around the area, and so there'd be a lot more sightings. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing you can see about the sightings, actually, and this again shows the nature of it's a phenomenon which is very much a human phenomenon. So if you look at where the sightings are, they're all clustered where there's humans. You don't. So it's kind of a function of where the humans are. It's where the settlements are around the loch. It's where the laybys are, where the cars can stop and look across. That's where people see the Loch Ness Monster. It's not. So, yeah, and there's some other statistics. If you look at when the Loch Ness Monster is seen, well, it peaks in mid-morning and peaks in mid-afternoon and dips at human lunchtime. Now, you could say, well, is that the Loch Ness Monster being less active at human lunchtime? Or is there some other explanation for the pattern of reports that we see in the Loch Ness Monster, which isn't to do with the biology of Loch Ness Monsters, but is to do with the behavior of human beings?
Yeah, totally. About the eels that are in the loch, I know that I've heard and seen some articles about they can grow very large, correct? Or like how big they get in the loch?
It's been hypothesized that they will grow really large. I don't think the definitive evidence of them growing really large it's not known to me. I think I would have come across that. So there's an idea that I don't quite know who it originated with, that you could get eels that in some sense are not sexual, they're just kind of eunuch type eels. Because they're eunuchs, they don't do what regular eels do, which is when they start to mature, that they kind of go a bit crazy and then they migrate out to sea and eventually go to the Sargasso Sea and they breed. And that's the way that eels are. And the idea is if you have a eunuch eel that for some reason just doesn't have that sexual impulse, then it just sits at the bottom of somewhere and just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Gotcha.
That's possible, of course. It's possible, and there have been cases of animals that kind of can get bigger. Their energy goes into growth rather than into their sexual organs, and so they can grow bigger, and that does happen in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
And so it's a possibility, but I don't think anybody's actually shown it, demonstrated. This is what happens if you cut the gonads off eels. They grow really, really big. Maybe they've done that, but even if they've done that, I don't think anybody's shown a wild population where it actually happens.
Sure.
So it's possible.
Yeah. No, it's just like you said, it's just one hypothesis, one idea out there that's floating around among the many. And how about the famous photo, the black and white photo that's out there? I believe, was it the 70s that this photo came out about that thing with the head popping up out of the water?
That's the so-called surgeon's photograph. That's actually 1934.
Okay, it's older than that. Okay.
Yeah, it was 1934. Now, there's a bit of a debate about that one. It was meant to have been photographed by a London, well, it was actually an ecologist, not a surgeon, but it's called the surgeon's photograph. He was a doctor, and he was, I don't know all of the details very well, but he was peripheral to a kind of expedition that went up to the loch in 1934 when the British as opposed to Scottish newspapers started taking an interest in it. And he took this photograph, excuse me, and of course ever since then there's been debate about what this photograph actually was. And some people say it represents an actual picture of the monster. Other people say that there's evidence that it's actually smaller. It's not kind of monster size. It's got very much smaller monster size. And there was a deathbed confession of a boy. Well, he was an old man when he died, but a boy who went on the expedition in the 1930s, and he said basically it was a toy submarine which somebody had kind of built up with plasticine.
Oh wow!
And then they photographed it, and that created it.
Okay.
But there's hints that it's quite small, because if you look at the photograph, there's a nice circular ring pattern of the waves, which I don't think you'd see if it was a big 30-foot long creature.
Okay.
You'd see if it was a little model just bobbing up and down in the water.
Yeah. No. I can totally see that, like somebody building something to make it look like, because it's too symmetrical almost, as far as shape and like as far as how it appears, and like you said, the size. You can almost see like it, like it's not organic looking.
Yeah, I mean, we don't quite know what. I don't know if you're thinking a Loch Ness Monster is a plesiosaur, what a plesiosaur looks like in the wild, and maybe they could like that. I mean, I don't know. There seems to be enough doubt that. I mean, scientists, we have a principal Occam's razor, the principle of parsimony. So we have two explanations of equal explanatory power. We choose the simplest. And, well, it's debatable what the simplest is in any context, but I kind of think that it's a hoax involving a model submarine versus a giant unknown animal which we've not seen in 64 million years. I think I'll go with the hoax toy submarine. I think provisionally, especially as we've got someone who said it's them.
Yeah.
And say it was a hoax. However, there are people who say that the claim it was a hoax was itself a hoax, and that the person who made the claim really was just kind of making up a story.
Yeah, totally.
Let the listener decide.
Yeah, exactly. We'll let the listeners decide that. You can find the photograph. I have it on my podcast in the background. So when the podcast airs, when I post this on our YouTube channel, they'll be able to see that actual photograph. I'll have it up there with your name on it, so it'll be cool. We actually, Zoom is actually limiting us. I didn't think it would, but we have 7 minutes left in the interview, so I want to make sure we get everything in here in that 7 minutes. So with that said, what's your personal belief? Like do you tend to like, are you a believer, or are you kind of like more towards it being an unknown species that hasn't been identified yet, or what's your personal take on Nessie?
Well, more generally, I think there are unknown animals out there, and I've done work which actually shows that if you look at the discovery curve of large marine animals, that is, if you imagine a graph with time on the x-axis and the cumulative number of animals described on the y-axis, and you plot that going back to the 18th century, you see a curve that goes up, and we discover lots and lots of animals, and then it slowly begins to flatten off as we reach modern times. But it hasn't flattened off yet.
Okay.
Which tells us that there are still animals to discover.
Sure.
So my opinion is there are still unknown animals out there to discover, but I don't think there's one in Loch Ness.
Okay, great.
but this is that's a really useful way of approaching this problem. And again, it's one of these examples where the skeptics and the believers kind of are not aware of this. There's good evidence, good kind of statistical evidence to show that there are unknown animals out there. We're still discovering new species of large marine animal.
Yeah, no, totally.
I say with total certainty there are unknown animals out there.
Yeah.
But just not in the places necessarily where cryptozoologist enthusiasts think they are.
Right.
But I think many cryptozoologists are not aware of that. Many skeptics are not aware of that evidence, and many cryptozoologists are not aware of that evidence.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, there's a lot of papers available that are peer-reviewed or not, that they can go by, and that's evidence itself, whether it be anecdotal or,
well, the use of anecdotal evidence, that's an interesting account in itself. I should just say, if you want to know about my papers, if you visit www.sea-monster.info, you'll get a list of all my papers, mostly with clickable links, so you can find them and read them themselves.
Awesome. I'm glad you threw that in there. So we have 4 minutes here. The time is ticking. I want to make sure that you leave your info for our audience. If you have any special events coming up or planned that you'd like to share with your university or personal project that you're involved with,
nothing. There's nothing being published in the near future. So keep an eye on that webpage I just mentioned, because that's where I put all the links to my papers, or just kind of Google my papers on Google Scholar, and you can find the papers. They don't often get mentioned in cryptozoology books, except by there are some well-researched cryptozoology books do mention them. I'm writing a book, maybe that will see the light of day sooner or later, which kind of hopefully will give a new take on cryptozoology, quite different to kind of published things. But what I would say is that be aware of the fact there is this kind of the many of the received stories which cryptozoologists have and skeptics have are actually not necessarily correct, and it's actually can be a lot more complicated and indeed more interesting than stories than most people believe, and also kind of be aware, that this stuff is peer reviewed in some really quite good journals, not just kind of any old journal, but proper peer-reviewed journals. Journal of Zoology, I've published stuff on sea monsters, on sea serpents in the Journal of Zoology. I published an account of how big giant squid get in the Journal of Zoology, and the Journal of Zoology is one of the top zoology journals in the world. So there is kind of real stuff out, really interesting stuff out there.
Yeah, sure. And visit his website, because I've been on there. I've seen so much things that you're involved with, and I really it's very respectable, and I commend you for the research you have done there. It's just amazing. There's a lot of stuff to wrap your head around, and I'm not a ecologist. I'm not an expert in the things you guys do, so it's amazing what you put out there. So I just wanted to make sure I say that. Thank you for the work that you do and that you put out there for the world to read and see, and have a better understanding of the nature of the field, as far as cryptozoology and the loch and any other unknown species that you guys are studying. And it's just amazing. No, really. Thank you for all your hard work.
No problem.
Yeah, so we had a pleasure, having the interview with Charles Paxton, and I hope to interview you someday in the future again. If we have more time. If I find a way of not limiting the interview, a time restraint would be great. So I'd love to have you again on the show in the future. It would be awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I hope you had a great time in the interview. I did. I love this subject. I grew up as a kid reading books on the loch and lake monsters and cryptozoology, Bigfoot. That's how I all started getting into the field that I'm in with the paranormal, and so it's like it makes me feel like a kid again. So it's great. Thank you again for doing the interview. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast. We'll be in touch, and I'll email you all the info when it gets aired on the YouTube channel, and we'll go from there. And I don't know, it was a pleasure having you.
No, it was great. Thanks,
yeah.
Thanks very much.
All right, great, and I hope you feel better.
Yeah, no, it's just in the background.
Yeah. No, totally. Get some rest, and hopefully it'll go away sometime. So have a great day, and enjoy your weekend.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, great.
Cheers.
All right, ciao. All right.
Okay, that's the official end, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing the interview. I really appreciate it.